Hello everyone, welcome to another podcast today here on YouTube. Today's interview is with the legendary George Smith from the BBC. He was the next kcfm presenter. You get to find out how he became the broadcaster he is today, and it's for my chatbox podcast series. So yeah, more uploads coming later on in the day, but I am trying to do it as fast as I can, but the full version will be available on YouTube. I'm hoping to get another podcast radio show up later today with my Paul Woodford one. So yes, keep your eyes and ears out for that. Keep your feet to the ground for that. Yeah, but first here's my interview with George Smith, and I'll see you in the wrap-up. BLL. Hello everyone. Welcome to another Chatterbox podcast for episode 11. How are you doing? Right, let's crack on. As you know, each week I have a guest to talk about their career or job. So let's crack on with this week's guest. It's broadcaster George Smith. Hi, George. How are you today?
I'm very good. How are you?
Welcome along.
Great to be on.
That's good. 5 questions about your broadcast career, if that's okay.
That's great. Ready to go.
Excuse me, you ready to rumble in the jungle?
Oh, yes.
Let's go for it. Question 1. Where did you start your broadcast career?
I started my broadcast career at the University of Hull about 5 years ago now. I had been listening to the radio for years beforehand, loving the radio, but never really thinking it was something I could do. And then when I started at uni, I saw there was a student radio station. I managed to get myself an hour slot and then just played a load of great music that I loved for an hour or so. And things went from there. I spent all my time at university ignoring what I should have been doing at university and instead planning my radio shows. And then I ended up moving from student radio to commercial radio at KCFM in Hull, and now working at the BBC.
Wow. That's a brilliant start to your career.
Yeah, it's a... Sorry.
Yeah, you go for it.
Yeah, it's a start that I'm very lucky to have. I never in my wildest dreams expected when I started at student radio that I would ever get paid to do it. And so I was very lucky that while I was still at university to get the chance to present on commercial radio and do the events there. And now that uni's far behind me, it's great to be able to do it as a proper job.
Who was the first face you met from your radio career?
Ooh, the first person I met was someone called Sam at KCFM, who I sent my demo in and didn't really expect to hear anything back, and was invited in for a bit of a chat. And then I was a bit starstruck when I got there because I realized that I recognized her from listening to the radio in the past. And it's that weird moment where you put the voice to the face and you realize, oh, I actually know you, even though I've never met you before because I've listened to you on the radio for ages. So I met her and she taught me everything that I know now. I wouldn't be able to do anything now if she hadn't taught me what she taught me in those first couple of years.
And that's obviously the wonderful Sam Heywood, who was on Viking for a few years before that.
Yes, it was. And I'd listened to her a bit on Viking and I'd heard her on KCFM because she was on air at KCFM before she moved to being more of a manager there. So I rocked up on my first day and I hadn't put, even though it was the same name on the email, I hadn't linked the two together. And when I walked in and I heard her talk, for a while, I wasn't thinking about what she was saying. I was just thinking, who are you? I recognize your name, I recognize your voice so much.
Then you realized.
Yes, and then the penny drops, and then you go, oh, now I should focus on what you're actually saying.
Yeah. Question 2. Who were your inspirations in broadcasting growing up?
I have always loved listening to a bit of Radio 1. I've always enjoyed Scott Mills. I've loved his show, but the person, and it's almost growing up, because it was a period in my life where I feel like I did a lot of growing up, was age, I was 18, 19, and that's when I really decided that I wanted to do radio, because I was at university. I did my first year of university at Huddersfield and lived away from home and didn't really enjoy it. And I would drive home every weekend, and I would listen to Hugh Stevens on Radio 1, lovely Welsh voice, very calm and soothing. And I'd listen to his show and I just felt a little bit better. So that was the inspiration for me to pursue radio. But in terms of who I enjoyed listening to when I was younger, it was a mixture of Scott Mills on Radio 1 and Hursty as well. And that was a big starstruck moment when I met Stephanie Hurst when I was working at Radio Leeds, and suddenly realized that I knew exactly who you were because I'd spent most of my childhood listening to her.
Where was she at when you were listening to her?
Well, it was when I was much younger. I would be driving to school, well, being driven to school, walking around places. I would hear her, and then when I started doing some work at Radio Leeds, she was presenting the mid-morning show at that time, and I felt genuinely nervous for the first time since starting working all that time ago, thinking, oh, should I ask her? Should I ask her to say hello? Am I allowed to say hello to Stephanie Hurst, or do I wait to be said hello to?
Yeah, as you say, there's a lot of legends there. One of my heroes, broadcasting heroes, used to work at the Look North in Leeds, called Harry Gratian.
Oh yes, I would regularly see Harry wandering around the building until he left Look North towards the end of last year. I think it was towards the end of last year, and yeah, you'd see him walking around, and he's another one. He's such a name. Everyone knows who Harry Gratian is, and you see him in the building making a cup of tea, and you think, oh, am I allowed to say hello to him, or do I need to ask his people if I can say hello to him? I don't know if he's got people, but he seems like the sort of person that would have people.
Did you say hello to him?
I did eventually, because I didn't know where the milk was. So I had to say hello and ask him where the milk was. And he was very nice, and he was very kind, and he did show me where the milk was.
He's West Yorkshire's answer to our very own Peter Levy.
Yes, and I mean, Peter Levy's another one of those where I didn't dare say hello to him. And I mean, I watched Peter Levy on Look North growing up because I grew up in Scunthorpe, so he was coming to our telly. And when I first was in the same room as him, I really didn't know what to do, because he's suddenly this person that you see on the TV stood right in front of you, and you realize he's real and he's there, and you almost forget that he's the real human being, don't you, when you see him on the telly so much.
Yeah, and one of my other heroes as well is Tony Blackburn.
Now, I've never been in a room with him, but I would love to someday.
Yeah, because I asked some of my guests who have met him before a Tony Blackburn story.
Unfortunately, I can't give you a Tony Blackburn story, but I hope that at some point in the future I can come back to you and give you a Tony Blackburn story.
Yeah, I love telling stories on these podcasts, if I'm honest.
Oh yes, well, I can give you many stories, but unfortunately none that involve, I think I can only involve one Radio 2 presenter. I've met Jeremy Vine, and that's because I went and sat in on his show a few years ago when I was first starting out. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I sent his producer a message saying, please can I sit in the corner and find out what you do? So there's a chair in Jeremy Vine's studio where you sit and you watch the show go out. And it turns out that it's in that certain place because Jeremy can see you from his studio, and he keeps an eye on it, and just keeps an eye on whether you are on your phone or anything like that. So if you're sat there and you're watching the show, and oh, sorry, just one sec. Yes, sorry. Yes, so if he can see where you're sat from his position, and if you are sat on your phone while you're there supposed to be watching the show, he can see you and he'll tell the producer, don't get that person back because they're sat on their phone.
Yeah. And one of my heroes I was starstruck to meet a bit was Neil Fox as well.
Yeah, so that's another voice. It's one of those voices I think that everyone would recognize, but out of context, if you heard it in real life, you might not think you're actually hearing it in real life because it's such a iconic voice that when you hear it, you go, well, that must be coming out of my radio because there's no way that that voice could be real.
Yeah. Question 3, what is your favourite part about the job?
My favourite part about the job, apart from playing great music, because I'm a music head and I love being able to play music and share music and tell stories about music, I love being able to get out and about and talk to people. And it's one of the things I've really missed over the last year because we've just not been able to go out and talk to people in the same way. And we can talk to people on FaceTime and on Zoom and on phone calls, but it's not the same as going out and about and just bumping into people. And some of the conversations that you have with people that you just bump into on the street or bump into an event are sometimes the best conversations because you're not expecting them. Whereas the thing that we haven't been able to quite work out in this new world of virtual things is how to get those spontaneous conversations. And I don't think there's really a way of getting it. I think the best way is good old-fashioned boots on the ground, heading out and about, chatting to people, finding out their stories, finding out what's making them tick, especially for local radio. That's how you find out what's going on in the community, is by walking around, talking to people that would never listen to you, because that's how you find out what they would like to hear.
I don't know about you, but I'm a radio presenter in training myself and I miss having guests in the studio.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting point because on my radio shows beforehand, it was part of my Friday evening show had a work experience planned to it. So 3 students from the nearby university would be on work experience on the show, learning how we do the show, and they'd be sat in and they'd make comments on the show. They would have a bit of a zoo format and just chat on air like that. But that obviously had to stop when coronavirus hit, and it meant that we weren't allowed to have people in. But in many ways, it has leveled the playing field a bit, because I think we sometimes think about people in the studio, and because they're there, we make a bit of a bigger fuss of them. Whereas for a lot of our local radio stations that I work at, we cover quite big areas, and the people that can actually get to the studios aren't necessarily the best people. Whereas it's almost leveled the playing field now, and everyone's got a phone. Most people have got Zoom and FaceTime and Skype and things like that. So you're not necessarily reaching for the person that you think might be able to come to the studio, because the person that lives next door is as close using Zoom as the person that lives on the other side of the county.
Yeah, and as you say, it's brilliant that we've got Zoom.
Oh, absolutely, because I genuinely don't know what we'd have done. And not just on air. I mean, every big thing that's been done on a radio station across the country has been planned on Zoom over the last year. And I'm not sure that many of those things would have come to fruition if we hadn't been able to do, if this had happened 5 years ago and we didn't all have the ability to go on things like Zoom. I'm not sure how well we'd have coped with it, quite frankly, because the technology has been brilliant, though I'm very much looking forward to the day when I never get sent a Zoom meeting again. It's should we meet at this place and talk about this at this point? Because I'm very excited to see people in the flesh again.
In the studio.
Yes.
And also it's good to be in the studio. I was in the studio earlier on today.
It is nice. And I know there's been a lot of people over the last year, presenters, that either for health reasons or for keeping numbers down in buildings. They've ended up doing their shows from home. And I feel very lucky because I live by myself and I'm desperate for any excuse to leave my house most of the time. So the last year, it's been nice to be able to come in the studio. And even though I've got a screen that has all the news and all the text and things like that, it does feel like a little break from the outside world. And the shows that I do, the brief that I've been given is to have fun and be a bit of escapism. So all the time I'm in the studio, it's escapism for the listener and it's escapism for me as well, because in many ways my shows haven't changed that much over the last year or so, because like not having people in has changed, but the tone hasn't, because it's all just about escaping from real life and just having a bit of fun.
Yeah, and it's just about getting that radio of art of the mind, as one of my previous guests on my previous podcast, a different podcast to this one, obviously, Stephanie Hare said. It's mind-boggling, and it's radio is television of the mind.
It is. It's about painting those pictures. It's about being able to sit there and somebody else picture what you're picturing in your mind. And I always find it the highest compliment when someone will message in with a response to an exact thing that I've said, like it's an awoken an old memory for them, because you've painted that picture. Because that's the job. It's about having fun, and it's about being a bit of escapism, and it's about, I feel, just making people feel something.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. And you're doing an inspirational job, you radio presenters. And I think at the moment BBC Radio deserves an award for their outstanding coverage. BBC Local Radio in this area, the Humberside region, and every local radio station in the country deserves an award for their COVID inspirational stories for helping us through the pandemic.
It was a difficult time last March when suddenly overnight we were told the world's going to change, and not just us that were told that, the whole country was told that the world is changing overnight, and it's reflecting that. And the biggest change from the start of 2020 to mid 2020, when we were in the middle of the lockdown, in the middle of the pandemic, was the community spirit you were seeing, and the ways that people were making a difference in their area. And it was just incredible to see. And our job at that point is to shine a spotlight on those people, give them the coverage they deserve, and help them out a bit if we can help them out by giving them a bit of a prop up and talking about what they're doing and what they need help with.
Yeah. Question 4. How has COVID affected your life and line of work?
Well, it's affected my life because I'm a freelancer, so I present shows at various stations and produce when I'm not presenting. So I'm usually 5 to 6 days a week. Before all this, 5 to 6 days a week, I was on trains, traveling around the country, working at different radio stations, popping up in different buildings. And that was my life. And it was a bit tiring, but I loved it. And I loved getting to meet so many different people and trying different ideas and just working in radio constantly. The big change was in March last year, when we were told you can't work anywhere else. You've got to stay where you are. So overnight, I was no longer getting the trains. I was no longer working in different buildings. I was doing some work for other stations, but not in their buildings. I was having to do it from home. So my life changed. I mean, you could say it changed in a better way, because my life suddenly meant I had so much more free time, because I was no longer getting on the trains everywhere. I was saving money getting on the trains, and I like to go for nice food when I'm waiting at the railway stations. So I would waste my money on that as well. And that wasn't happening. So I'd suddenly have free time in my evenings, ironically, at the time where there was absolutely nothing to do with your free time. So I started running instead. And then when the pubs reopened, I started eating and drinking. So all of the benefits of running disappeared and got replaced by the disadvantages of eating and drinking. So that's how my work changed mostly, is that it's all become a bit more remote. I'll sit in a room by myself rather than sitting in an office with other people. I'll do a lot more production from home. I usually only turn up now to present the shows, and everything else is produced from home and done more remotely. And that's the main thing that I'm really looking forward to getting back to. I'm looking forward to being able to hunker down in a room with people and have some creative ideas sessions again, because the thing you just don't get is as much bounce on virtual platforms, on Zoom and things like that. I don't think I get as creative when I'm not in the room, and you get a certain creative energy just around you and you just start throwing ideas around. It's hard to get that when maybe the video's jumping around or the internet's frozen up or you've got someone banging in the kitchen behind you because they're trying to make some food. It's difficult to be as creative. I think it'll be interesting, the amount of ideas that have been bubbling up. I know I have at least 3 ideas a week that I immediately have to go, no, we can't do that under the current restrictions. And I know that pretty much everyone else that works in this business will be having the same sort of ideas. So I think it'd be really interesting to see the creativity and the amount of fun stuff and interesting stuff that happens once the restrictions are removed and once we can get back to operating more as normal than we are right now.
Yeah, and also as well, it's brilliant that Zoom, but it's also disappointing as well because you're not face to face.
And that's the thing. I do worry that some face-to-face things are going to be replaced with Zooms, and I hope that it's not. There are some things that very much could be very easily replaced with Zooms, but I hope that there is still room for the in-person creativity that I think just thrives so much more than it does usually when you're just seeing everybody in boxes. And I've always said, even before this, that probably the least creative place that I could be is in an office. Don't think I've ever had a good idea while sat in the office. My good ideas come when I'm out and in a different environment, because that's when my mind starts thinking. All the time I'm in familiar situations, my brain never comes up with anything. But the moment I'll go out for a walk, I'll read signs, I'll earwig in people's conversations, that's when my ideas come.
Yeah, brilliant. Question 5. What advice, last question on the list, what advice would you give to young, aspiring broadcasters?
I would say you can never start early enough knocking on doors, getting to know people and getting to know things. And it can be quite difficult when you're not really sure where to start. So it never hurts to be a little bit cheeky. If you've got someone that you think might have the answer to your question, even if your question is just who's the best person to contact about this, be cheeky. Try and work out their email address. Try and send them a message on Twitter, something like that. They might not give you the answer. I can't guarantee they'll give you the answer, but I always try and help if I can. And I always try and give the answer if I can. So the worst they can do is say no. They could give you the answer that you're looking for, and it could be a game changer. So be a little bit cheeky and try and get to know as much as you can. Just any opportunity you get, just grab hold of it. The best piece of advice I ever got was when I went to sit in on the Jeremy Vine show on Radio 2. And at that point, I knew I wanted to work in radio, but I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to do. And I went out for lunch with the editor, and he asked me what I wanted to do, what I could do. And I reeled off this whole list of things. And then he asked me, do you want to do this? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. And he told me it's as useful to know what you don't want to do as it is to know what you do want to do. So don't ever consider anything that you try as a waste of time. Even if you absolutely hate it, it's the worst thing you've ever done. You can tick it off your list as something you definitely know you don't want to do. And that's still beneficial.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's brilliant, George. And also, my advice to young people is watch, learn, and listen.
Absolutely. I mean, there is so much you can learn from just, and obviously you can't do this at the moment because you can't stand over someone's shoulder, but just sitting in a corner of a studio while a presenter's doing their show and not saying a single word, just sitting over their shoulder and watching what they do, watching how they do things, just soaking it in. Because everyone's got something to learn. I like to think that I do something different each week so that I'm trying to improve. I like to try and, even if it's just the way that I say a certain phrase or the way I get into a certain feature or the way I come out of a song, something different each week so that I'm not just going into autopilot and I'm progressing each time.
Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us, George. Do join me again soon for another podcast, but for now, please give it up for my special guest, George Smith.
Thank you very much.
Do join me again soon, but thank you very much for listening, and that's a wrap. That was my interview with George Smith of BBC Local Radio and kcfm, formerly of kcfm, and loads of other radio stations. But yeah, that's his interview, and join me next time when I'll be joined by broadcasting legend Lee Barber. But for now, please like, subscribe, dislike, whatever you want to do, to be honest. And that's about it really. So yeah, BL out, and that's a wrap. See you in the next one. Bye.